there, this is Clyde the Coyote here for the Middle Ground Book Fest panel to speak or not to speak, blending research, culture, and magic and animal stories. And we have a great panel of middle grade authors, and we're going to go around, and each of the authors is going to introduce themselves and tell the name of their new book, and if it's already come out, or if not, when you can find it to read.
I am Adriana Cuevas. My book is The Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez, and it came out July 21st, so you can read it right now.
Hi, I'm PJ Gardner. My book, which I just happen to have, I don't know if you can see it, right beside me, is Horace and Bunwinkle, and it comes out September 15th.
Hi, everyone. I'm Celesta Rimington, and my book, The Elephant's Girl, here it is. That came out on May 19th of 2020, so it's available now for you to read.
Hi, I'm Karah Sutton, and my book, A Wolf for a Spell, there we go, comes out on September 22nd.
Hi, I'm Kaela Noel, and my book, Coup, came out back in March.
Hi, I'm James Byrd. My book is The Brave, and it came out June 30th, so almost a month now.
Okay, lots of great books. Let's get started with our questions. We're going to start with the question of animals and humans communicate differently. I am a coyote, and as a matter of fact, coyotes prefer the method of communication known as Morse code. Little known fact, now you know. I just would love to hear each of you speak about the role communication between human and animal plays in each of your stories. Maybe we'll start with Adriana.
So animals and humans communicating is actually a big part of my book, because my main character, Nestor, is trying to keep it a secret that he can actually communicate with animals, unlike everybody else in the world. And so in writing the book, I got to have a lot of talking animals, and it was kind of my opportunity to be as ridiculous as I wanted in my writing, tell as many jokes as I wanted to, be as silly as I wanted to, because that was kind of the role that the animals embodied. They really like to tease Nestor and egg him on. And so it was really fun to write talking animals, but also how their personalities and how they spoke would be different depending on what kind of animal they were. I have a deer that speaks much more eloquently than the raven that likes to dive bomb people and poop on them. So it was fun to write different ways that animals communicate in my book.
So my book's from is solely animal point of view. So communication between humans and animals, obviously the animals understand the humans, but the humans don't understand the animals. And while humans populate the world, it's still an animal world, but it's a mystery. So when it's time to solve the mystery, if you don't have thumbs, it makes it hard to apprehend your suspects, and that's where you need your humans to come in, and that's where you also need to be able to be like, come follow me, because there's bad stuff going on. So it was a little bit tricky actually to write it and get it to work, but fun, and lots of misunderstandings that can be serious or comedic, like what are couch potatoes, things like that.
I gotta say, that rings true to my real life. Sometimes you guys just don't get me.
In my book, The Elephant's Girl, communication with the elephant is very important to the story. My main character, Lexington Willow, is found asleep next to the African elephant in a zoo following a major tornado. The elephant saved her life. So throughout the story, she discovers this special way that she can communicate with the elephant. And in order to do that, I felt like I needed to really research how elephants communicate in our real world and study the science of it. And I kind of expanded on the science that I discovered about how elephants communicate through sound we can't hear, infrasonic sound that travels through vibrations in the earth. And I didn't give Lexington Willow a special power, like a superpower that she can hear those vibrations, but what she can do is she can sense the elephant's memories through the vibrations that she feels.
Yeah, so in my book, A Wolf for a Spell, this was actually a huge thing that I went back and forth on a lot, because the idea of the story came about originally because I wanted to tell a fairy tale from the big bad wolf's point of view. And usually in fairy tales, the big bad wolf talks to humans. But then as I continued working on the story and it changed a lot over the years, it became much more about the relationship between wolves versus humans versus witches, and how witches and wolves are generally kind of the villains in fairy tales, and what's their situation against humans. And as I kind of moved forward, I liked the idea of witches being the more human-like and wolves being the more animal. And so I actually moved away from that and made it so that I went from wolves and humans being able to understand each other, and the wolves being very human-like, anthropomorphized, where they would kind of eat food in a human way and things like that, and then moved into them becoming true wolves. And what I ultimately decided on was that the wolves couldn't communicate with humans at all. They couldn't understand the humans. They couldn't speak to the humans. But the witches could do both. So the witches can talk to humans and the witches can also talk to wolves. And so that became a fun dynamic in the course of the story.
Kind of a communication triangle.
Hi, everyone. So my book, Coup, is about a girl who spends the first 10 years of her life living with a flock of pigeons on a roof in Queens, New York. And the central conflict of the story is actually what happens when she rejoins the human world after the pigeon closest to her is injured, and she has to seek help for him from a local pigeon feeder who ends up taking her in as well. And throughout the book, she has to figure out what it means to be human, and communication is an enormous part of that because she's only spoken the pigeon's language, which I invented for the book, and that's where the book is more of a fairy tale, because although the pigeons don't speak like humans, they certainly speak with more complexity than real life pigeons appear to. So they have a distinctive language in the book, and I made a little grammar guide for it so that I could keep track of it when I was writing. And Coup slowly learns English. Her human caretaker, after she's adopted by this woman, speaks English. So she begins to understand more of the difference between herself and the pigeons in a way that she can articulate through language throughout the book. Yeah, so I would say actually communication is one of the biggest themes of the book for me when I was writing. James?
Hi. So my book is Native American, and I'm from the Ojibwe tribe. And animals in the Native American culture are very much a huge part of their belief system. So in my book, all the animals are in fact animals and do not like communicate with humans in that world, but are like ancestors that are deceased or animals that come through in dreams. So there's a lot of communication between humans and animals, but it stays in the real world as well. It's basically the Ojibwe culture. Thanks.
Okay, wow, this is really interesting. Everybody kind of has a different approach with their stories. It's very interesting. I guess my next question would be, I mean, you guys all have an interest in animals. If you've included them in your story, have you ever had a special relationship with an animal, or maybe like some incredible thing that has happened where you interacted with an animal that if you were maybe to tell somebody about it, they would say, no, that did not happen. I do not believe you. And let's go in the same order. Okay, take it away.
I think for me, one of the reasons that I wanted to include such a close relationship between the animals in my story and Nestor's dad is deployed overseas with the military. And that my husband, the first 4 years we were married, I did not see him very much because he was in the same situation. And I was actually taking care of a cat that belonged to a buddy of his who was also deployed. And I feel like that cat knew like my emotions. It knew when I was depressed and sad, which was a lot during that time. And it almost seemed like it could just sense what I needed. Cats in general, I think we describe them as rather self-satisfied, selfish creatures that are happy just being on their own. But this cat really wasn't like that. And I would even go so far as to say that it pretty much took care of me while my husband was gone. And so I think for me, that would be my animal situation. But that was really one of the things that inspired me to put so many animals in my book that do, in the end, as much as they like to rib him and joke around with him, they do end up taking care of Nestor.
That's so nice. And I will say my experience with cats is they are very empathetic creatures. And it looks like you met one of the extra empathetic ones.
Well, I have dogs, so I mean, I think every dog owner is like, I have a special relationship with my dog, and now we have a puppy, and so we have lots of special relationships. But I don't know that I've ever had an incredible moment. But my sister did. I grew up in Denver. We were at the zoo, and this peacock fell in love with her and followed her around the zoo, like the whole day. We would be doing something, and then this peacock would just show up and he would fan his feathers and then he would shake them at her. And she was 16 and mortified. And we were like, it was before, cell phones, so we didn't record it. Otherwise we'd still have it and torment her with it. But he was serious about her. And I think he was very disappointed when we went home.
Sounds like he had a little bit of a crush.
When I was working on The Elephant Squirrel, I spent a lot of time at zoos because the setting for The Elephant Squirrel, hey, James has a copy. Thanks, James. The Elephant Squirrel is set in the zoo and Lexington Willow lives there. And I actually wore my zoo shirt today because I used to work at Omaha's Henry Doorly Zoo and Aquarium. And my mom saved this shirt for me. It was years ago and she found it, dug it out when my book was coming out. But because I spent a lot of time at zoos, just watching the animals and kind of taking in the sights and smells, and I'm very particular about which zoos I visit. I talk about that in my book because not all zoos are created equal, and accredited zoos do a much different job in taking care of their animals. But one day I was visiting the Harbor Reef at the zoo in Salt Lake City, and I had been working on my revisions for The Elephant Squirrel, and I had taken my laptop with me and was just sitting there typing away. And this harbor seal kept swimming toward me at the glass, and it just was staring at me. It was the strangest thing. Usually they're just playing and they'll swim around, but this one would swim right up to the glass and stare at me, and then swim around and stare at me. And it was probably, I don't know, it was probably just my imagination, but to me, I felt like a connection with that harbor seal, and I just loved it.
Celesta, was that seal by chance, was his name Augustus, do you know? Because I have a friend that he just really likes staring contests a lot. And he lives in that area. That might have been him.
Really? I actually don't know the name of the particular seal that was staring at me, so maybe there's a likely chance it was Augustus.
It I gotta say, I mean, that's what it sounds like. Okay, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I mean, for me, animals is a big part of, well, a personal journey for me because I grew up in Kentucky and my family wasn't very outdoorsy at all. We went on some trips through mountains and things like that, but kind of being out in nature wasn't really a part of me growing up. And then when I went to, when I became 20, when I got into my 20s, after I graduated from college, I moved to New Zealand. And so I've lived here for the past decade of my life. And in New Zealand, you're just a lot closer to nature. I've got a forest right near my house. I also live right near the ocean. And in that time, I've become quite an avid bird watcher. New Zealand's interesting in that because it was an island in the middle of the ocean that grew up almost completely removed from everywhere else. It has this completely unique bird culture with all these birds that don't exist anywhere else in the world. And there aren't any native mammals except for bats. So no deer, no rabbits, no mice, nothing. Everything was birds. And so I just really love getting out into nature, going for walks. That's something that my husband has really instilled in me. And so we try to do that, pretty as often as we can, really, even if it's just the forest near our house or else going a little bit further, somewhere more remote in New Zealand. And I've learned a lot about what the difference between entering an animal's territory. The phrase that we use is leave only footprints, take only photos. Because you're not to leave anything behind and you're not to take anything. Don't take sticks, don't take rocks, just you are entering their world. And I don't have like specific like instances where a bird has kind of come up to me, but just being able to see them and being able to hear them commune with each other is a really different experience, and just one that I'm really grateful for.
So I guess this isn't necessarily an incredible experience. It was in a way because it instilled in me a kind of empathy for birds and an understanding of their complexity despite how small they are. But when I was a child, I grew up with a single mom, and she often needed favors from other mothers in my school district, which was more affluent in general than we were, which was always a little awkward. But there was one mom of a friend of mine who would sometimes pick me up from school. And so I guess this mother felt that my mom owed her. And so they needed someone to watch their cockatoo, whose name was Edgar, for winter break because they were going to Thailand on vacation. And Edgar properly belonged to my friend Emily's oldest brother, who had just gone away to college. And he arrived, they dropped him off, it was December, in this big hulking cage. He was all bundled up, very angry. And my mom and I lived in a one-bedroom apartment, and I had the bedroom. And it was the biggest room in the apartment. So Edgar's gigantic cage went into my room, and it was actually right up against my bed. So there was no escaping him. And he was just very angry. It was very clear to tell, despite the fact that he weighed 1.5 pounds, that his emotions were right there. He was unhappy to be in our place. He was unhappy to be among new people. If there was any kind of paper nearby, he would pull it in and rip it up with his claw beak dexterity. So that would have been it. I would have had a week with Edgar and understanding that birds can express anger and all other emotions, except winter break ended and my mom called Emily's mother and she hung up on us. And my mom called her again. She again didn't answer and we couldn't get in touch with them. I ran into Emily in school and she wouldn't talk to me. Finally, another week went by and they announced that they couldn't take Edgar and really we should keep him. So we did. And so Edgar ended up living next to my bed, and his mood did not improve. If we let him out of the cage, he would like go up onto the top of the refrigerator and hide there. He was just very grumpy. And I learned a lot over those weeks and months about how much animals can express without using human language. So that was very eye-opening for me. I was around 9 or 10 years old. And Edgar's story does have a happy ending because and my mom ended up meeting this woman through like a meditation new age group who didn't have kids and was a bird lady and had a 4-bedroom house, and the other 3 bedrooms were for her birds. So she adopted Edgar. He went to live with her, and we visited him a few times, and he was much happier. His entire demeanor changed. And my mom kept in touch with her for a while, and Edgar lived another 10 or 15 years with her. Would have been about 10 more years with her. And so they never, I guess, I'm not sure how old he was, but he passed away eventually. But the last decade of his life was very happy. And it wasn't until I finished writing Coup that I realized in this like moment that Ruhu, who's a very like critical, grumpy pigeon in the book who doesn't like humans and is very suspicious of them, he's Edgar. And Ruhu, despite the fact that he's not very agreeable, has a lot of really good insights into human behavior. And it was interesting to realize after the fact that I had written a character based on someone without realizing it. So I sort of read the book again after that, like, who else did I sneak in here? But I think Edgar was, Edgar was the only one. So that's my story.
Hi. I rescue animals. So I have a lot of animals. I have 3 cats, a dog who's at my feet, a potbelly pig that's like 200 pounds, 2 turkeys, husband and wife turkey, and they just had babies. So there's 2 babies. So that's what I have at my house right now. And a story about animals. I have one that saved my life. I'll try to make it really fast. I was in Hawaii, and I was by myself at the time. It was for a film festival, and it was right before the sun went down, and I was going to rent a little boat to or a little canoe just in the harbor to paddle around by myself. And this guy came up to me, and he was like saying, "Oh yeah, don't worry about it. You don't need the rules. Just take my canoe." And he's like, your blood is my blood. I'm native too, so I don't need to tell you how to do it. You don't just let your blood kick in. I was like, oh, that's so strange. And he's like, yeah, just there's boundaries, but let your blood kick in. You're native. Don't worry about it. I was like, all right, that's the weirdest thing. But so I started paddling out. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know about the currents and tides and all that. And it started drifting me past this orange buoy. And I'm like, okay, well, as long as I could see the shore, I'll know where to go. Then the sun went down, and there was fire torches all across the coast on the beach. And I was like, how can someone, I have no idea where to go, because slowly it got so dark that someone started putting out the fires one by one. So I completely freaked out. And I had my phone, and I felt like I was in the middle of the ocean because I was way past where I was supposed to go. And I just kept drifting. And every time I would paddle, I felt like I wouldn't go any closer to where I had to go. And it was so black that I didn't even know which way was the right way anymore. I couldn't see. There was no land. It was in the big island, so it was all mountain. So there was no street lights or anything. And I had my phone. I didn't have reception. But when I turned on the phone, and that whole week, I've been trying to find as many big honu, those big turtles. I was swimming with them all week. So I didn't have reception, but I had my flashlight, and I turned on my flashlight, and I was like, okay, fish, I'm native. I know some of you are native in there. Yeah, help me out. And a turtle popped up, a huge turtle, I don't know if you can see my hands, but the size of my desk, turtle popped up. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, you heard me. Okay, you're native, I'm native. Let's work together here. I'm lost. I need to get home. Like, can you help me? Like, and it kept going forward. Like, it picked a direction and kept going forward. And I would paddle, 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 but I couldn't move. I couldn't go forward because the tide. And I was like, that's not helping. And the turtle would come back. And then I was like, okay, I know you understand me, and because you keep coming back. So please, you got to show me. I don't want to jump out of this and swim because I'll definitely be eaten by a shark. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm drifting out further and further into the ocean. I have no idea where Hawaii is anymore. And so the turtle saved my life. I had the flashlight on. The turtle started swimming diagonal like this. So I started paddling diagonal and I followed the turtle all the way back to the shore. And that's my story.
Wow, that's a great story. I'm glad that worked out because you're here to write all these great books for us. All right. Yeah. Wow. Ha. That was a little harrowing there. Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next question, which you guys have kind of answered some of this a little bit, but I'd like to hear more in depth about, you each wrote about different kinds of animals, and you humans have ideas about animals. Some of them are based on scientific observation. I'm sure you guys are kind of watch us a lot. And some of it is based on probably myths and stories. And I guess I'm wondering if there's any research that you did while you were writing your books. Were there any things about the particular animals that you found surprising? Were there myths about the animal that you felt like you tried to avoid, or maybe that you used in your story on purpose?
So for me, Nestor is part of a quiz bowl team at his school, and because he's the grade that he's in, the quiz bowl only deals with and like zoology, and so I actually had to find a lot of animal facts for my book because I had to come up with the quiz questions. But that wasn't difficult to do because one of the main things that inspired me to write the book in the first place was my 12-year-old son is absolutely obsessed with animal trivia. He used to sit on my bed, like right before he would go to bed, with this massive animal encyclopedia that we had bought him. And he would just flip through and, Mom, did you know this? Mom, did you know that? Or he'd tell me a fact and I would have to guess what animal he was talking about. So it wasn't hard to do the research because my child almost did it for me. But I think of all the facts and things that I had to come up with, my favorite one was that the military tried to train bats during World War I to drop bombs. And I just thought that was so idiotic and chaotic, and that kind of fits the theme of my book. So I knew I had to put that fact in there. And then the other one that I really liked, because it's so disgusting, and I love that too, is that there's a type of frog that gives birth out of its mouth. And so I've always said that's something that I like absolutely want to picture in my mind, but absolutely don't want to picture in my mind. So I had a lot of fun coming up with the animal facts and seeing how ridiculous, like what are the most ludicrous ones that I could find. So it was a lot of fun.
So one of my main characters, Bunwinkle, is a Vietnamese potbelly piglet. And it just so happened, actually, I was driving home. I was playing hooky from church one day, and we were driving home, and I happened to see a lady walking two Vietnamese potbelly pigs in my neighborhood. I live in the burbs. So for there to be two pigs walking the neighborhood, I was like, that's unusual. And my oldest son was like, stop the car. You got to go talk to her. And I was like, this isn't weird to just like screech to a halt and be like, I love pigs too. Or, you know, I mean, it was so, okay, so this is going somewhere, I promise. So I contacted her and I was like, hey, I'm writing this book and I'd like to do a little more firsthand research. You know, can I come visit your sanctuary? Which was literally like 2 blocks over from me. So I went, and it was very interesting. One of the things I learned right away is there are no such things as mini pigs. There's no teacup pigs. There's no designer pigs. People are told that you're going to buy this pig and it's going to stay cute and tiny, and that's not true. And now a potbelly pig will maybe get to 200 pounds like James is, right? But it won't get as big as a hog, which can get up to 900 pounds, but they don't stay this big, and they don't stay cute. They get funky looking, which is cute in its own way. But it was really important then, because in my story, it's a series, we're going to be locked in time. She'll forever be a piglet. The chicks will forever be chicks, So it was very important to me to communicate that to my readers, because the number one reason, the lady who runs the refuge, she said the number one reason they get pigs turned in is that the person did not think they would get big. And so it's very important to me that no one's going out to buy pigs now, and then also get mad at me, and I get nasty mails like, my pig's huge. So that is a very important thing I learned.
Yeah, it's kind of sad, really, that there's, being, just because you don't stay small forever doesn't mean you stop being cute.
Yes, and I wrote a story about animals that get very big. So I mentioned earlier that I had done some research about elephant communication when we talked about the humans communicating and elephant communication. And one of the things that I learned that was so fascinating, I followed the research and read and watched a lot of the research of an elephant scientist named Katie Payne. And she and her researchers would observe and gather around herds of elephants for long periods of time and record them. And one of the times that she was observing an elephant herd, Katie Payne noticed a whomping feeling on the sides of her head, and realized those could possibly be sound waves that I'm not hearing. So she took the sound of the recording that she had done of these elephants for long periods of time, and she sped it up times 10. And you can find it, you can Google Katie Payne online, and you can even watch, and she'll play it for you. But if you listen to her sped up recordings, you can hear the elephants communicating in their language that we can't hear as humans. And it almost, to me, sounds a little bit like whales. It's so amazing, and it's beautiful, and it's varied in its sounds, and they never stop. They're constantly talking to each other. So I thought that was really interesting. And then one of the things you asked about myths or misconceptions, something that was really important to me when I was writing this book was to be careful about how I portray elephants in zoos or circuses, and to show that that's a very complicated issue, and that elephants have very specific needs in the wild that are impossible, really, for humans to duplicate in a situation where the elephants are confined. And I didn't want it to become an issue book, but I wanted to make sure that I wasn't perpetuating misconceptions about, oh, it's cool if I go to Thailand, I should ride an elephant. Because it's very important that readers, especially my young readers, understand what elephants' unique needs are and what their problems are and the challenges that they have in our world. So I have an author's note at the back of the Elephant Scroll that I talk about my research and the things I found, so that young readers can go get more information if they find they're concerned about elephants and they want to learn more.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that. What I did in your research, did it prove true? Do elephants have good memories, the way they say?
They can't prove it, but they've done a lot of research to show that elephants can recognize other elephants even 20 years after not seeing them. There were some elephants that were in a circus together, and they were separated into zoos. And then later, almost 20 years later or more, they ended up at the same sanctuary. And the video of them reuniting was very emotional. It was beautiful. You could tell they knew each other.
Sorry, just off topic from my question, but from my answer, but yeah, I just have to say, like, I love that that importance of like how we interact with animals, because I went to Indonesia last year, and that's a huge thing, is the elephant riding, and so it was yeah, really important to me. It's become a thing that I'm like now trying to make sure that everybody understands, is how to kind of vacation responsibly and how to interact with animals in a way that's not distressing to them. So I love that you put an author's note in about that. Yeah, I guess with mine, so a lot of my research had to do with wolves. Obviously, there's also a raven character in the book, but there was kind of less. I still researched him as well, but I think the key thing that that surprised me was because I came into this purely from the idea of wolves from fairy tales and not really knowing anything about wolves about actual wolves. And I think the thing that just surprised and saddened me is how distrusted wolves are. They're still hunted en masse all over the world because people are just so afraid of them. And there's a lot of myths that are perpetuated about wolves, about them being bloodthirsty or hunting for sport or being dangerous. And just so much of that is not true. There's just, and that became a really important theme in the book, was that the wolves very much take this stance of, we don't interact with the humans, and they stay away from us, we stay away from them. And yeah, it's something that's still, just even today, a lot of wolf populations all over the world are very endangered. I think in certain Scandinavian countries there's fewer than like 100 wolves. So that really saddens me, and I think that's it's hard to draw conclusions about like fairy tales necessarily perpetuating that, but it is part of a culture where we believe that wolves are the villains, and believe that they're dangerous as a result. And so, yeah, I really wanted to just kind of help people understand that that's not necessarily true. And the other thing that I really found interesting, was the whole myth of the alpha wolf is actually not true as well. So there's, and that's part of, again, this idea that we have, that wolves are kind of brutal, and that they will like fight for dominance and things like that. And that's not necessarily true either. Like, wolves actually just behave in families, and that the leaders tend to be the parents. And they work together as groups, and they're really just supportive of each other, which I thought was actually really beautiful. So, yeah, both of those things were just one very sad to learn, one very heartwarming to learn. But I think those were both just great things that I wanted to convey in the story.
Yeah, so I think maybe I don't want to compare pigeons and wolves. They're so different, but it's true that both of them are reviled in some ways for different reasons. And I think, similar to Celesta, I didn't necessarily want to make it Coup into an issues book. And an interesting process is some of the more issuesy bits were edited out. Not just by me, but also my agent thought it was a little too preachy. Like different times when I tried to go at that kind of angle straight on, the story suffered. So it's tricky. It's hard in fiction for kids to sometimes figure out the balance between engaging story and discussing, complicated things in the world. So. Where was I going with this? Anyway, so I don't exactly address head-on the human-pigeon conflict in a way that is resolved at the end of the book. Like there's I don't know if I need to avoid spoilers per se, but the pigeons in the city where Coup lives are actually threatened by a kind of pigeon-hating mayor, and she tries to stop further destruction of pigeon flocks once she hears about that going on and finds out what's happening. And she's successful, but it's definitely an issue. Like, I understand when pigeon flocks are roosting in places that make it very difficult for humans to live alongside them. And I support humane measures to deter pigeons from settling places that can't support them. But the book, Ku itself as a book, Ku's point of view is definitely that my main character, her point of view is definitely very sympathetic to pigeons and animals in general. But in terms of mythology and pigeon facts, I did find out some really interesting things about pigeon intelligence while I was researching the book, and it took me so long to write that the pigeon research actually caught up with me as I revised it. So there was a burst of interesting pigeon intelligence research that came out a few years ago, and that was nice. I benefited from that, such as they are visually, they are very precise, and they can, with training, they can identify all the letters of the Roman alphabet and common words with training. And then they can identify common words that have typos in them so that they can function like a little spell check. And they're very good at noticing small differences like that. So that was definitely interesting. And in terms of mythology, years ago when I got the idea for Ku, it came out of a fascination that I had as a child with so-called feral children, a lot of which are in reality not children who have been raised by animals, but rather children who were abused or somehow ended up in these situations where they're living alongside animals. So that's a definite misconception about what a feral child actually is. There are very few cases in history that may have actually been a child living and socializing with animals. But when I was a kid, I was fascinated by this idea. And I also, as a child, read this book by Karen Hesse called The Music of the Dolphins, which maybe some of you might have read. It came out in the late 90s, and I read it several times. It was in my school library. And I found it really disturbing. It's a much heavier book than Ku is. It's about a girl who ends up living with a pod of dolphins on a small island after a plane crash, and what happens when she's discovered by scientists or rescued and then ends up with these scientists who want to study her. So that it has a very different trajectory than my book, and it's not warm and cozy. But I read it, and I found it disturbing as a child, but I read it a few times, and that kind of idea of someone living in a child in that liminal space between human and animal was very interesting to me. And there's like a long history in mythology of children raised by animals, like Romulus and Remus founding Rome after being cared for by a wolf. And I found that ancient Assyrian, not Syrian like the Syria, the country, but the group Assyrians, which are separate, had an ancient myth about a queen named Semiramis who was abandoned in the wilderness and cared for by doves as an infant. So that always, she was always sort of in the back of my mind too. Yeah, so I could keep going with this, but it's
very interesting. And I will tell you a little fact about pigeons that I know.
Sure.
They cheat at checkers.
I could believe it. They would actually be quite good at checkers if someone took the time to teach them, because they're quite good at that kind of stuff.
Yeah, they're good at checkers, but they get more satisfaction if they win by cheating. Go figure. All right, James, bring us home. What are your insights in this section?
As far as research, I come from the film industry, so I started writing screenplays many years ago. And when I did, every single film I make has some kind of animal symbolism in it. So my research started with animals a long time ago, and I guess the best thing that came from that is I stopped eating animals 14 years ago now. I haven't eaten an animal in 14 years. And that's because when I met my wife, we were playing dice and we were betting each other stuff. And, I was the guy, so I was like, okay, if I win, you gotta take off your shoes, you know. And she was like, okay, well, if I win, you gotta never eat animal ever again in your life. I was like, you know, and I grew up eating meat, and I lost. So that day, 14 years ago, I haven't eaten an animal since. So I guess
Wow,
my
that's a long
research.
time. Yeah, that's good. You know what?
Yeah. So
I
and then
don't eat any either. I'm a waffletarian.
yeah, and mythology wise, I just, you know, Native American is they're always my tribe believes that like when you pass or to the next world, you're met not by the people you wronged, because humans actually have the ability to lie and cheat and betray each other. Animals don't. So when you pass, whether you're invited into the next world or not, you're met by all the animals that interacted with you, and the animals get to decide whether you go or stay. And if you lived a life and you treated animals great, the animals would welcome you to the next world. And if you lived a life and you know, were cruel to animals, or you know did bad things, you'd probably end up back at Earth as one of those animals. So that's why uh, animal compassion is so huge for me. My film We Are Boats came out in 2018, and it's the first cruelty-free film ever made. And that just means that there was no animals harmed, worn, or eaten during the production. So
Oh, that's so
I
great.
think Joaquin is doing. I think Joaquin Phoenix is doing a movie right now, cruelty-free, and he's getting credit as being the first, and mine was 2018.
Oh,
so.
well, we know better, don't
So
we?
me and him got to talk.
Yeah, you were there first. But it's a great thing. It's to have somebody continue on and keep doing that, right?
Yeah. I think it's going to become a thing, because a lot of people probably didn't do it because it sounded so hard, but it was a lot easier than what people think.
Yeah, it's good to start something like that and other people learn from it. Continue on. I love it. I have one more question. This is a quickie. Adriana has already fulfilled this one because she's my favorite. No, I love y'all. I'm just kidding. She does get an extra gold star though, because she already has a coyote in her book. And I just want to know, yeah, there it is. Oh yeah. Who else in the future? Because you guys are all going to keep writing books. I know who's going to have a coyote in a book in the future. Raise your hand. Do you mean it, or are you just trying to suck up a little bit? No, you mean it. I know you do. You guys are great. I think some of you did not raise your hands. That's okay. That's okay. I am so glad to have gotten a chance to talk to all of you, and I'm so excited that you guys have your debut novels out, and I know you're going to write lots more books, and I hope everybody out there will be inspired to pick up your books, because boy, they sound so interesting. And just, I hope you guys know that what you do is so important and it's really appreciated. So please keep doing it. And thanks for watching, everybody. Goodbye.